Hello, and thank you very much for having me here. It's such a pleasure to come and speak to you today. What I would like to talk to you about is really my journey about overcoming diabetes hurdles to achieve sporting success. So a little bit about me and my background. My name's Melanie. I've been an athlete for 13 years, and as was mentioned, I'm a student dietitian now as well. I've got type 1, and I'm currently on an insulin pump, and I've been on a pump kind of longer than I was on injections, so of my 16 years. And I'm also a vlogger, hence why I wasn't here this morning. I've flown in from the Netherlands from doing a product review, which was diabetes related. And in terms of what I plan to talk about today, I'm going to talk about my diabetes journey, my diabetes and my sporting background as well, the hurdles that I've had to overcome in order to achieve my sporting success, and what I feel helps you kind of get success in the bag, really, the tools that I think that you need. A little bit about diabetes and technology, because as an athlete, that's something that I get asked about a lot, and then I'll open it for questions if we have time. If we don't have time, I'll be seeing you all in the pub later, so please feel free to come up and have a chat. So, my sporting career. Unlike some of the amazing athletes that have already spoken to you today, I am the other extreme. I might be an international athlete, but I keep the distances short, the 100 metres and the 200 metre sprints. In the past, I've been a record holder and also the Welsh champion on numerous years, numerous occasions, indoors and outdoors for athletics. I represented my country on over 25 occasions, and I've also captained it as well. I think probably the captaincy is one of the things that means the most to me, because you know you've got your own struggle with diabetes, but to be the captain of a team, you also have to be a leader. So for me, that meant that people weren't concerned about my diabetes. They were concerned about my sporting kind of capabilities, which meant a lot. I'm a 4 times BUCS medalist. So BUCS is, for those who haven't come across it, is the British Universities Championships and College Championships. So it's every university in the UK comes together, takes its athletes and to compete against each other. Again, it's something that I'm particularly proud of, because this year we won a bronze medal with my university in the relay, and 2 of the 4 relay runners had type 1 diabetes. We were both on insulin pumps, which is something that I've never experienced before. I've rarely met another athlete on the track, let alone been in the same squad. So I think that means that we're really moving forward with our knowledge and education in terms of type 1 in sport. And I currently train 6 days a week. So in terms of my type 1 diagnosis, it might be very similar to what a lot of you have experienced. I had the normal symptoms back in 2001 when I was 13. I was tired all the time. I had to miss school because I couldn't stay awake in lessons. I was incredibly thirsty, getting up through the day and the night, sticking my head under the tap, just getting as much kind of liquid in me as I could. I lost about 2 stone in weight and just going to the toilet all the time as well. So my mum knew there was something wrong. She didn't know what it was because we didn't know anybody with diabetes at the time. We didn't really understand what the symptoms meant, but she knew to get me to the GP to get tested. When the results came in, he told her to rush me to the hospital, and that's where I was diagnosed and went on to 2 injections a day. But what did type 1 diabetes diagnosis actually mean in real terms? Initially, there was an awful lot of fear, because it was fear around, what does the future hold? I think my parents had plans, they kind of had ideas, I had ideas, and did my future now look different because I was diagnosed with this condition? And I think I was kind of afraid myself, afraid to go back to school. How were people, my friends, going to look at me? And there were the dietary changes as well. I know we know that you can live a normal life and have a normal diet with type 1, but there was kind of the changes in the drinks and not adding sugar to food and the little things that you still needed to know. The regular blood glucose test was something completely different I had to then incorporate into my routine. And injecting it in public was a massive deal as well, because you'd find that people were giving you kind of sidelong glances and wondering what you were doing. But my mum was an incredible support, and she made sure that I knew I had nothing to be ashamed of that I was injecting in public. It was something that I needed to do, and I should just get on with doing it. And then eventually I think I kind of came to terms with the fact that I had diabetes, and acceptance was incredibly important, and an opportunity to kind of move on and move forward with how I felt about the condition. My diabetes nurses and educators were so important to my diagnosis, the process of it, because when I was diagnosed, they went into my high school and spoke to the teachers about what the condition meant, and they reinforced the fact that I was not to be excluded from any type of physical activity, whether that was PE, whether that was school trips, and I will forever be grateful to them for that, because it meant that I had a really good school life, that I was included in everything, and I felt like any other child. They also kind of made sure that I always did the things that I wanted to do. So because I wanted better control over my diabetes, they kind of moved me on to 4 injections a day then in the paediatric clinic. And as I mentioned, it was thanks to them that my school included me in sport and activities. And age 16, I got involved in athletics. So 3 years after my diagnosis. And I then specialised in the sprints and the long jump, but I don't mind telling you, I don't have a lot of coordination, hence why I run in straight lines and slight circles. So the long jump has since left. And in Wales, we've got a great grassroots scheme. So I was doing schools competitions and building up the level and really learning about my diabetes as I went, I guess, in terms of sport. I was training regularly and I was really starting to see some benefits to my diabetes in doing sport, which kind of helped me find more motivation to carry on if it was ever difficult. And I also got myself a coach as well. But the journey with diabetes in sport hasn't always been an easy one. And for me, one of the biggest hurdles to overcome was back in 2008. I started becoming insulin resistant. So whereas I should have been on 4 injections a day, I was finding that I was having to do what I now know are correction doses in between my injections. And as a teenager in university the first time, this was just not how I wanted to live my life. I felt poorly all the time. I had terrible high blood glucose levels. I was really, really struggling. And so my only option then was to go onto an insulin pump. But because we're talking a decade ago, not so much was known about insulin pumps and sport, and we didn't know whether this would be the end of my athletic career. My diabetes clinic are absolutely incredible, and they've been incredibly supportive, but it really was a big question mark over athletics. And I remember my last race that I did before I was going on to a pump, and I honestly believed that that might have been the end of it, that I might have to give up athletics, and okay, I might feel better about my diabetes, but I would have to give up the sport I loved, basically. It was just a big question mark. But thankfully, I did get back to athletics. It just took a little bit longer than we thought it would. But during that time, it was a very difficult time because to go onto an insulin pump, I had to agree to stop doing athletics for the time being whilst we got my basal rates right, which wasn't really kind of normal life for me. And I really, really struggled with that. I also had to take a year out of university because, as I say, I had a very difficult transition, not to put anybody off insulin pumps because I love mine now. But I am really thankful in a way for that struggle because it taught me an awful lot. At the time, I didn't have any friends with diabetes, so I didn't have anybody to talk to about how I was feeling about my insulin pump transition, about the diabetes in itself. But then that taught me that actually that's something that when I feel stronger, I want to provide for other people in the future. So that's why the quote that I wouldn't have found my strength without my diabetes. And I hope that that's a story that people can relate to, that yes, having diabetes is a struggle, but there have been positive things as well that have come from it, like today. So as I mentioned, when I had my transition, I had to take a year out of university. And I was like, what am I going to do with my time? I've got this time on my hands. I need to do something. I just won a couple of big athletics competitions. So I was like, right, okay, I think volunteering is going to be what I'm going to do. So I got in touch with Diabetes UK and said, right, I'm an athlete. I've got type 1. What can I do to help? Their response was, okay, let's start you off as a media ambassador, promoting a positive image of diabetes in the press. And that was a decade ago, and I haven't really looked back in terms of volunteering. But I think volunteering has given so much, but it's also allowed me to give something back, which has been incredibly rewarding. So just a little bit in terms of the types of volunteering that I've now done. So I'm from Cardiff, so I spend time at the National Assembly talking to Assembly members and getting them to put diabetes higher on their agenda. So whether that's better access to pumps or blood glucose strips or spending more time with your GP, just making sure that our voices are heard and that we're not forgotten. In Wales, again, we've put on student cookery schools for people with diabetes so that they can meet each other and enjoy the experience of being people with diabetes together, but also to gain some skills so that you feel confident with your diabetes carbohydrate values when you go to university. And also with the NHS Confederation, so being a patient voice and speaking to healthcare professionals. And again, kind of giving a personal story so that there's kind of a story behind the diabetes. It's not just a medical condition. As I mentioned, one of the main things that I do is spend time kind of talking in the press about a positive vision of diabetes, because unfortunately sometimes we see the headlines in the papers and it all gets a bit confused when we see, oh, you know, diabetes costs the NHS this much. But actually you can live well with diabetes, so why shouldn't we be talking about this? And that's also a message that I was invited to take to the European Parliament. So slightly unpopular, I know, with Brexit now, but it was a key message just to kind of, again, put us high on the list of priorities and to show that education in terms of nutrition, in terms of fitness, can really improve the lives of people with diabetes, so we need access to it. And as I mentioned previously, one of the things that I learned when I had that really difficult time, when I had to kind of give up my athletics and my diabetes wasn't so good, was I learned the value of the psychological support that others can provide when you meet somebody else with a condition and you get that instant connection with them. So I set up my own support group called Blue Circle Diabetes, which is just really simple. It just involves people with diabetes coming together. And there's really no more to it than that. Okay, we're online, but really it's just, again, that instant connection and that instant support network. So back in 2012, I was incredibly grateful to be nominated for my volunteering by Diabetes UK to carry the Olympic flame in front of 20,000 people in Cardiff. But I particularly appreciated the opportunity because it was an opportunity to show people who don't have diabetes, who perhaps don't know anything about the condition, that actually you can live a completely normal life with it and that you can still achieve your sporting goals or whatever your goals might be. And then also during the Olympics, I was really fortunate. I think I might move from behind the TV. I feel like I'm hiding from everyone. During the Olympics, I was really fortunate that the brand Nike gave me my own campaign. So it was called Greatness Slaps Good. And it was an incredible experience. I felt really fortunate because the campaign was about ordinary people doing not so ordinary things. And you would think, oh, because it's a Nike campaign, they're going to make me hide my insulin pump, hide the fact that I've got diabetes. But actually, in all of the photo shoots, my pump was out. You can't see it in that one, but they were really supportive about it. And it was just an incredible opportunity, again, to show that having diabetes doesn't need to stop you doing anything. One of the other problems I would say that I've faced in terms of kind of international athletics and kind of managing everything is when, on occasion, not always, but when healthcare professionals have asked me if I really need to do athletics and I really need to do it to that level. Of course, my answer is yes, I absolutely need to do it, and I will do it safely, but I will still do it. I do understand where they're coming from in terms of, okay, control can sometimes be a little bit less predictable. There are more blood glucose tests involved in doing high-level sport, I get that. And there is, of course, the risk of hypoglycemia as well. But I think that the benefits far outweigh the negatives. Some of the sporting benefits I see in terms of diabetes and sporting achievements is that, yes, there is an awful lot of hard work involved, but I've seen that my blood glucose control is generally an awful lot better. When I take time off training, say last year when I got married, I went on honeymoon, I find that I need a lot more background insulin, for example. I find that okay, other athletes don't have to think about what their blood glucose levels are doing or their carbohydrate counting. But I think that extra knowledge is actually a strength, because why wouldn't you want to know, when energy is so important to athletes, what your blood glucose levels are doing? It is a bigger challenge, perhaps, for us compared to others, but then isn't the success that much better because you've had to work that much harder for it? And I think you become part of a community outside of the diabetes community where you're not labelled as somebody with diabetes, you're labelled, if at all, as an athlete. And it helps you to challenge the stereotypes that can sometimes be associated with the condition. But probably most importantly, I think athletics is fun. So just a little bit about the types of training that I do. It really is quite variable with sprinting. You would think that it's just a lot of running fast, which it is a fair amount of, but we also, in Wales, we've got a lot of sand dunes and a lot of mountains, as I'm sure you're aware. So there's a lot of kind of hill running and sand dune training. There's a lot of sprinting on track, technical sessions, not so technical, but endurance sessions. And we also do Olympic weightlifting as well. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that, I'm sure as the others have mentioned, each of these different types of training have different effects on my glucose levels. But for example, if you don't already do sport, but it is something that you'd like to kind of be involved in, these are the things that I would basically say are quite helpful to know. That blood glucose testing is absolutely your best friend, because without the knowledge of what your glucose levels are doing, how can you expect to perform to the very best of your ability? Don't be afraid to talk to your coaches or the other athletes about it. My training group carry jelly babies with them, and I carry jelly babies as well, because it's not a taboo subject. So what that I've got diabetes? They know if I'm sat by the side of the track testing, they'll keep an eye on me, but they'll leave me to it otherwise. Keeping a training diary allows you to find trends and patterns in how your body responds to the different types of sport. I don't think you should be afraid to try. If you are a little bit scared about it, of course talk to your healthcare professional, but don't let diabetes get in the way. So what does sporting success require? I think the best advice that I can say is running your own race. It can be really easy to try and compare yourself to other athletes, other people with diabetes. It's something that we all do. But if it's only you that you've got to beat, then that's the measure of your success. And I found that it kind of clears your head a little bit, that you're just kind of thinking about your own performance and just kind of going forward with that rather than worrying about others. So this is just a typical training week, really, the demands of my training, to give you a little bit of background here. The active recovery sessions are just as important as the actual training sessions. And I found as well, nutrition is incredibly key, and that's why I've gone back to university to study as a student dietitian, because I found that having the right nutrition has made an incredible difference for me. But when I first started my athletics, there wasn't an awful lot of advice out there about the right nutrition and how to balance everything. So I want to make the journey easier for people with diabetes who want to be involved in sport. So of course it's important because it fuels your performance. So without it, you haven't got the same energy levels. But I also look at the timings of my nutrition. So a lot of people ask, what do you eat? When do you start testing? If I've got a training session in the evening, I start focusing on what kind of fuel I'm eating from breakfast, because that's obviously the fuel that's going to be kind of digested and helps you later on in your session. I manipulate the different types of carbohydrates that I use. So I'm, aware of the fast acting, the slow acting, and where, in terms of training, I use them. Of course, hyperprevention is closely related to nutrition as well, because with sport and with performance, I want to avoid having hypos overnight and also maintaining a healthy weight as well. So in terms of elite sport, a couple of the other things to think about really is sports psychology has been amazing help in terms of when I got my insulin pump, I had to learn to run with that instead. And the sports psychologist was incredibly helpful with that. Goal setting, whether that be diabetes wise or whether that be sporting wise, can help you stay really focused. And competition practice is incredibly important as well, because diabetes behaves quite differently in competition compared to training. I think you have to be prepared for the officials and the governing body. Generally, in athletics, they're very understanding, but I have had a lot of funny comments about thinking my insulin pump was an MP3 player, because you're not allowed music in the warm-up area. So I've always got my answer politely prepared for that so that I can get back to my performance. Adrenaline is a nightmare. I'm still looking for the answer to that one, unfortunately. But if it's any consolation, it's something that everybody seems to struggle with before a competition. And then I think my diabetes still loves routine as well. As you can see, I personally think that the requirements for diabetes success are the same as the requirements for sporting success in terms of discipline, being tough about it, mental toughness, resilience, motivation. I think the two really do kind of feed into each other, really. A lot of what I've learned about athletics, I put into my diabetes, and because I had diabetes first, I take that onto the athletics track then as well. So coming to the end of the presentation now, so just a little bit about sport and tech, because as I say, that's a question that I get asked a lot, because I spent about 7 years on injections and I've been on an insulin pump close to a decade now. So a lot of people ask which one is the easiest to manage with sport. And to be honest, both of them have got benefits and downsides as well. Our old friend adrenaline comes up. I don't know that you really deal with it better on a pump or on injections. It's just one of those things that's there, unfortunately. With the pump, you can see a CGM line going up and up and up as you get more and more excited about the competition. But one of those things. And then I suppose in terms of kind of bursts of insulin compared to refined amounts, I find it a little bit easier in the gym to have the more refined doses coming through on the pump than I ever did on injections. And I also find that I have a lot less hypos as well. Blood glucose testing versus CGM, both are fantastic. Blood glucose, CGM can't exist without blood glucose testing. So again, they kind of go hand in hand, but it is good to see the patterns overnight after training with CGM. And highs and lows and data are incredibly important to kind of reflect, as I mentioned, and to see the patterns and trends and try and rectify it so that your performance is really focused the next time you compete. And just to leave you with a final quote, really, that the battles that count, despite what I've said, are not the ones for gold medals. The struggle is within yourself, the invisible, inevitable battles. That's where it's at. As people with diabetes, it's not just a physical condition. It can affect the kind of psychological side as well. But I just want to reassure you that you're getting there, you're here, you're engaged with your diabetes, and you're doing a good job. Thank you very much.